Hi, it's Corey. So, before we start today's episode, I just have a couple announcements. First, I realized that there was a problem with the intro music on last week's episode. So, if that was super loud for you, I'm sorry for blowing out your ears. Second, I am going to be taking a break from the podcast for some time. This podcast takes a lot of time, and I love working on it, don't get me wrong. I have two little kids, and this summer I just plan on watching them play in the mud and splash around in our inflatable pool. So look out for me soon. Third, I just want you to answer a question in your mind right now. And that question is, do you like this podcast? And do you want more? Okay, so that's two questions. But uh, if the answer to those questions is no, then no worries. That's cool. Been working on my fear of rejection, so I'll be okay. But if the answer is yes, then I just have one request for you. Um, please just tell people about this show. That's it. I'm not going to ask you for money or anything like that. So here's how to do that. Go to theteenmind.com. Scroll down until you find your favorite episode. Maybe it was the episode about parts and whether or not there's a single driver in your mind. Maybe it was the episode where we went deep into how David's anxiety was born in the first place. Either way, for each episode, there is a YouTube video. Click on the little arrow in the upper right hand corner of that video, and you can then share that YouTube link on your Facebook or Twitter feed. That's it. That is all I ask. Thank you. So, what's up with David? So, one thing I haven't told you about him yet is that David is Catholic, and every Wednesday night he goes to confirmation class. His teacher is nice, and she tries really hard to get this group of teenagers to care about the class, but the fact is, most of them really don't want to be there. And David is one of those kids. He spends the time daydreaming and mostly thinks about homework and friends and the usual teenage stuff. But on one particular Wednesday night, he's not in a great mood and he starts thinking about how much this feels like just a waste of time. And a resentment starts to build. And it starts as just resenting this class, but it quickly builds to resenting his teacher, resenting his priest and this church, and pretty soon he's feeling pretty angry toward the Catholic Church as a whole. And for his whole life, David has just gone through the motions. First confession, first communion, now confirmation. He never really questioned any of it until this class. And one way the class has influenced him is that it's forced him to think. Do I believe this stuff? Do I really belong here? And so on this Wednesday night, his resentment gets him thinking a lot more about these kinds of hard questions. Why doesn't anyone ever talk about if God is real or not? They talk about God like it's just a given that we believe in him. But what if I'm not sure? It's like everyone is just going through the motions, just coming to this stupid class because our parents make us, but because that's what you're supposed to do. I can't believe I'm sitting here pretending like I'm 100% on board with this, just filling out this worksheet like a good little Catholic boy. And he wants to stand up and just say this to the entire room, to just unleash the doubt and the profanity that's swirling around in his head. But his anxiety part is not going to let that happen. So instead, he opens up a blank page in his notebook and just goes to town. He writes this angry rant with so much passion that he tears the page with his pen. Every third word is an F bomb, and as he goes along, he feels the pressure that's been building in his head start to release. And he's still writing as the teacher dismisses class. And he just takes some deep breaths and goes home. Hi, I'm Corey Bush, and you're listening to The Teen Mind. Today, as you probably guessed, we're talking about faith. I know, didn't see that one coming. We normally think about religion and God in this box over here, and then mental health in this other box over there. And I get that. But really, they are very closely related. Religion can have a negative impact on mental health, but it can also have a positive impact. Today, we're going to talk about how faith in a higher power can be a huge benefit to a person's mental health, and why the teenage years are so important in the formation of faith. But first, back to David. That night, he can't stop thinking about it. He wants to drop out of confirmation. He wants to write an angry letter to the priest or the bishop or the pope or all of them. But most of all, he just wants to talk to someone. He still feels like he needs to get this off his chest, to know he's not the only person that thinks these things. So he works up the guts to talk to his mom. And his anxiety gets a little worked up, but it's not completely taking over. So he goes to his mom and says, "Mom, what is the point of going to this confirmation class? I mean, it's super boring. I just really don't want to do it." And Sheila closes the book she's reading and just sits there for a few seconds thinking of what to say. And she starts with what she thinks she's supposed to say. "Well, I didn't love my confirmation class, but I'm really glad I went, because, it was just kind of a necessary thing to getting to where I am now with my faith." She sees him just look down and nod like, "Yeah, I thought that's what you'd say." But she can't let this rare chance to have a real conversation with her teenage boy slip through her fingers. So she changes her approach. "David, I just kind of said that because I didn't know what else to say. What's on your mind? What are you really thinking about?" "I just don't see the point in any of this. Confirmation, going to church, saying Our Father and Hail Mary. It's like the only reason I do all that is because it's what I'm supposed to be doing. It doesn't even really mean anything to me. And I guess it's just making me angry. Everyone talks about God like, well, of course God's real. Of course God loves you. And I don't know. I don't know if I even believe in God. Like, what if God doesn't exist? Like, I feel like I can't even say that." And David expects his mom to be shocked or angry or upset. But she isn't. She's surprisingly calm. She just smiles at him. "I thought these same things when I was your age," she says. "I never had the guts to say them out loud, and I'm glad you did." And he let out a long, slow breath. "Can I tell you a story?" she asks. For a long time, I didn't know if I believed in God either. And as I got older, especially when you were born, I knew that I really wanted to believe, but I still wasn't even sure. And I didn't know what it meant to believe in God. And then we got this new priest at our church, Father Julian, and he was just really smart guy, like just very intelligent. And he talked about God and Jesus with such a passion that it helped me to get over these thoughts that said in my mind, well, you're too smart to believe in God. Because if this really smart man believes, well, then heck, I can believe too. But the big thing was your dad's depression. There was a time there when his depression made me really angry and depressed too. And I was so angry at him and feeling so sorry for myself. And it was right during the worst of it that it seemed like almost every week Father Julian was talking about no matter how much pain you're going through, no matter how alone you feel, that the most powerful being in the universe is on your side. And not in an abstract way, but in a personal, very real way. That he's giving you a hug and telling you that he loves you no matter how messed up you feel. And even now, there is still a part of me that doesn't know for sure if God is real. But there's a bigger part of me that knows that believing in him is really good for me. I don't know. Does that help? Yeah, it does. So, wait. You don't know if you believe in God? Okay, so hi. I'm going to talk here as myself for a little bit. Um, and I'm just going to put my cards out on the table right now. I am a Christian, and a big reason I'm doing this episode is because my faith in God has helped me tremendously with my anxiety and just with other mental health things going on for me. And I think that there is a really important place for spirituality when talking about mental health. And one thing I'm not trying to do here is to convince anyone that you should believe in God. I don't think I'm capable of doing that, and it's just not my goal. Another thing I'm not trying to do is convince you that Christianity is better than any other religion. Again, even if I wanted to do that, I don't think I would be able to. But I do want to say that faith in a higher power, who I'll call God, has the potential to help a lot with anxiety and depression and just a whole bunch of other mental health problems. And if you believe in God, or you think you might want to believe in God, or even if you're just curious about the mental health benefits of believing in God, then stay with me. I first want to just also acknowledge some of the big negative impacts that religion can have on mental health. And one of the biggest ones, I think, is when religion makes people think that they have to follow certain rules or have a certain sexual or gender identity, or even that they have to be a good person in order to belong and to be loved by God and go to heaven and all that stuff. And so this kind of religion, I think, can actually be very harmful to people's mental health. Because when you have to do something to earn the love of God, then that actually, I think, can add anxiety to your life. And so I just want to be upfront about that religion is not some perfect thing that's always going to be helpful. And so I want us to think about David, and I want us to think back about his anxiety a few episodes when we talked about how his anxiety was born. Because it was born to protect him from rejection, especially rejection from his parents. And for most of us with anxiety or depression, this same fear plays a big part for us too. A lot of us are afraid of being rejected because, as far as our brains are concerned, rejection leads to death. So as parents, one lesson we can learn from this is that it's important to show our kids unconditional love and acceptance. We don't want our kids to feel rejected by us. But we're human. We mess up. We get mad, and we do things that, no matter how great of parents we are, that send the message of rejection to our kids' brains. And there's no parent who gives their kids perfect unconditional love. It just doesn't happen. But there is one being who does: God. And even if you don't believe that God exists, you can still acknowledge that the belief in a perfect being who loves you perfectly no matter how much you screw up, no matter if everyone else thinks you're a complete failure, that belief has the power to calm your panicking amygdala. Because no matter what happens, you can never be rejected by God. And I think it's important here to say that this is maybe a different understanding of God and even Christianity than what some of you are familiar with, especially if you hear talking about how if you do this or if you don't do that, then you're going to go to hell or God hates you or something like that. And there's just a whole bunch of really intelligent Christians, and I'll mention their podcasts actually at the end of the show, who don't believe that. And so if you listen to Christians like this second half of Christians I was talking about, you'll hear that God is not someone who's going to be mad at you or going to judge you or going to hate you for doing the wrong thing. That God is actually a perfect parent. That he loves you no matter what you do, and that he will never be disappointed in you or yell at you or anything like that. He will just say, yeah, you made a mistake, but I still love you just as much as I've always loved you. I'm just going to say it again. I think that this is a really big deal because when you're having anxiety or depression, you are able then to tell your amygdala, look, I understand that you're afraid of being rejected, amygdala, but I can never be rejected by God. And if you really believe this, like really actually believe this, then it will help your amygdala calm down, and your anxiety or your depression will calm down with it. So, what does this have to do with David? Well, David is in one of the most important stages of his life in terms of faith development. The teenage years are when a lot of people make their decision about God. Think about it. Until adolescence, your brain is just not equipped to really decide whether or not you believe in God. And so when David is 16 and he's forced really in this confirmation class to think about God, it's the first time in his life that he's really ever asked himself that question. Do I believe? And as adults in our kids' lives, no matter what belief system we have, it's extremely important to ask our kids questions about faith and then to just listen. And in these types of conversations, I think that the less we adults talk, the better. Because another thing that's happening for teenagers is that they're trying to figure out their identity. And if you try to tell a teenager what his identity is, whether it's Christian or Muslim or atheist or whatever, he's maybe just going to reject that for no other reason than because you're trying to force it on him. And it turns out that identity is really important, not just in terms of which religious group do you belong to, but it's crucially important in the deepest meaning of faith, no matter what the religion. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll start by telling you about this guy I was listening to who's talking about God and faith. And he said, when you think about the question, who am I? What comes up for you first? Is it, I am a parent, or I am a friend, or maybe it's I'm an engineer or a teacher, or maybe it's I am black, or I'm gay or Chinese, or maybe it's I'm kind or athletic or hardworking. Or is your answer, your first answer, I am a child of God? What he was really asking here was, what's the most important thing in your life? What is your primary identity? Is it your family, your career, your race, or nationality? Or is it God? Because if you believe in God, but he's not the most important thing, even more important than your family, your friends, and your career, well, what he was saying in that time was, then you're doing it wrong. And for me, I think for most of us, my initial reaction was, wait a second here. I believe in God. I go to church. I pray sometimes. Now you're asking me to make God more important than anything else in my life? Like more important than my family? I don't know about that, man. That sounds kind of extreme. And I'll tell you, I'm still wrestling with this now. It's something I'm still working on. But I think that I get it. Because if the most important thing in my life is my family, then when things aren't going great with my family, well, that's going to really bring me down. But if God is most important, then when family life gets tough, it just doesn't hit me as hard. And I will be able to stay more mentally healthy and therefore more supportive with my family. So essentially, what this argument is saying is that faith has the power to bring about a deep sense of security even through really tough times in our lives. But most of the benefits don't come if our primary identity is in something other than God. So let me give you an example. Many of the parents I work with, their primary identity is as parents. And this means that when things aren't going well for their kid, then deep down, they become really afraid that maybe their kid will end up as a failure. And if that happens, then in their mind, they are a failure as a parent. And if their primary identity is their parenthood, then failure as a parent is very scary for their amygdala. So they get very anxious or angry, and they try harder to control their kid, to stop them from messing up. And the harder they fight for control, the more they end up pushing their kid away, and then things just get worse. And so, by saying that God has to be the most important thing in your life for this to work, it sounds like I'm making an argument for an all or nothing mindset about faith. That if you're going to believe in God, then you have to be all in. Well, yes and no. What I'm really saying is that all in is the goal. But that doesn't mean that you're always going to be there. Most of the time, I'm aiming to make God a bigger part of my life. But then there's also sometimes when this part of me crops up that thinks that God probably doesn't even exist. And I think that's okay. I don't know if there's very many people who all the time, every single second, really 100% believe that God is the most important part of their lives. But what I'm really trying to say is that if you want faith to have a bigger impact on your mental health, then you need to decide, what is your goal? Is it to make God the most important thing in your life? Or is it something else? And if you choose to make God your primary identity, then you can just talk with him. And it might sound something like a conversation that Sheila had with God during Tom's depression. She started off by saying, God, I don't know what to do. I feel so angry and miserable so much of the time. I'm so worried that Tom's depression is going to be horrible for David. I want to quit work so I can be home with him, but we need to pay the bills, and I want to make Tom go away until he gets over this. I can't do that either. Just tell me what to do. And then, using her mind's voice, God said to her, give David to me, and I will protect him. And that was it. And in that moment, she imagined letting David go from her tightly wrapped arms and releasing him to God. And her anger and her worry, they didn't completely go away, but a calm security did enter her body that gave her a small sense of peace. And without that peace, she may have had a breakdown herself, which then really just would have made things even worse for David. So, the most important thing that you can do as a parent or as a human being to care for those around you is to loosen your grip on them. And the only way to do this is to tighten your grip on God. So, one of the most important things that we can do as parents or just as human beings to care for the people we love is to loosen our grip on them. And the only way to do this is to tighten your grip on God. We humans, we need things to hold tightly to. For most Americans, we make that our families, or our friends, or our jobs, and we hold very tightly to those things. But the thing about holding so tightly to the people in our lives, to the work that we do, is then we start to worry about, well, what if this person is mad at me? Or what if this person rejects me? Or what if I screw up this big project? Or what if? But if God is the most important part of our life, then those things just aren't as big of a deal anymore. And they don't trigger our amygdala as much as they would. And we can just be free to be ourselves and just be happier, more productive people. And so at the dining room table on that Wednesday night, when David unleashes his angry rant against the Catholic Church, most parents in that situation would try to steer their child in a more rational or a more mature direction with their thinking. But Sheila instead hears God say once again, give David to me. And she remembers she can't control him. She can't make him believe in God or make him be a Catholic. And so she loosens her grip. She does not argue with him or point out why he's wrong in what he's saying. She just listens, stays curious about his story, and when he's done, she says two of the most important words a parent can say to their child. I understand. So, producing this episode was pretty scary for me. I always have just a weird feeling when I talk about God, probably because I've had bad experience of other people talking about God with me. And so I would just really love to have your feedback on this show, on this episode especially. And so you can just send that to my email address, Corey, Corey, at elementscounseling.mn.com. Also, if you want to hear other people talk about God in a way that will help you or your teens' mental health, I recommend a couple of podcasts. One is put out by a church called Mercy Vineyard, which is in Minneapolis. And the other one is by a guy named Tim Keller, who is at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. And so before we wrap up, again, if you like the show, if you want to hear more of it, then all I ask is to spread the word. Just tell more people, send them a link to theteenmind.com, tell them about your favorite episode, talk with people in real life, write about it on Facebook or Twitter. Whatever you want to do would be great. Thank you. The Teen Mind is a production of Elements Counseling, Inc. Find more, including full text of each episode and how to get a hold of me at theteenmind.com. Thanks to Paragraphs for the theme music. Find them at paragraphs.bandcamp.com. I also do counseling with teens, parents, adults, and couples in Minneapolis. I do workshops for parents and teachers throughout the Twin Cities metro area. If you have questions or comments, I would love for you to just email me, Corey at elementscounseling.mn.com. Thank you for listening.